We have a piece that's in the Breitbart citing the Washington Post. Speaking with the Washington Post, the women echo the experiences of others who have escaped the estimated thousands of concentration camps built in Xinjiang, China's largest and westernmost province, to house Uyghurs, Kazakhs, Kyrgyz ethnic people, while survivors tend to be Kazakh. They can use their dual citizenship to escape neighboring Kazakhstan, and the majority of the 1 to 3 million people trapped in the camps are believed to be Uyghurs. Others who've survived have been able to use their marital status to citizens of Pakistan or other neighboring countries to place pressure on Beijing to release them. Camp survivors have previously testified to extreme torture, killings, live organ harvesting, infanticide, and slavery in the camps. An AP report published last year revealed that some clothes made in slave facilities in the concentration camps made their way to America. Quote, any woman or man under age 35 was raped and sexually abused. Riki Perhat, a student arrested in Xinjiang in 2009 for 4 years, told the Post. More recent survivors say that the camps had made rape more systematic than in regular prisons. Guards would put bags on the heads of the ones they wanted and take the women out of their cells to be raped all night, returned for their fellow prisoners to see in the morning. One human rights activist told the Post they had documented at least 7 cases of women being forced against their will to receive intrauterine devices as part of their entering the concentration camp, presumably to keep them from getting pregnant through rape. Those who were arrested while pregnant, often for crimes, quote-unquote, like downloading the messaging application WhatsApp, were forced into harrowing abortions. This is like, in many ways, the Third Reich that's taking place here. And the Xi fancies himself the new Mao, and he will do anything to control the country. It is a heavy-duty police state. I am appalled that American companies are still doing business there. I'm appalled that the National Basketball Association buckled, and they're not the only ones, as you'll see in a moment. But before we do that, this is why the people in Hong Kong are protesting. You know, when Hong Kong was given up by the Brits to the Chinese, the deal was that they'd be allowed to keep their culture, allowed to keep their government, and China has gone back on that. China is trying to control what's taking place in Hong Kong, and they've done so slowly but steadily. And then the last line for many of the people there was that any so-called criminals, people accused of crimes, would be taken from Hong Kong and shipped to mainland China. And you can see what happens in mainland China. And they resisted that. The government in Hong Kong is basically a puppet government of the Communist Chinese now. And they said eventually, okay, we'll pull back from that. But the people in Hong Kong understand exactly what's taking place. That the Chinese military has as their intention to eventually incorporate Hong Kong into mainland China, as they do Taiwan. And we should be saying a hell of a lot more about this in the United States. And the protesters in Hong Kong wave the American flag. They cite our Declaration of Independence. They're looking for more support from we in the United States. You know, people talk about looking back at what happened to the Ukrainians with the Soviets, what happened to the Jews with the Third Reich. Why didn't people speak out more? And they're right. And why aren't people speaking out more about what China's doing, among other countries? It is a reprehensible, hyper-oppressive, genocidal regime, and it is intending to expand its reach beyond its borders into the rest of the world, and it's having great success at doing it. Meanwhile, here in our country, we have the fifth column, including the press, now including the Democrat Party, including academia, trying to take down an elected president and causing so much anguish and political battle internal to this country that we're not able to focus as a united country on what's taking place in a country like China that definitely is our enemy and definitely threatens us. And we finally have a president who's standing up to them. Anyway, let's take a look at this. This is The Economist when it comes to some of the protests that are taking place in China, in Hong Kong, and what's at stake. Go.
This protester calls himself Bruce. We've hidden his face and obscured his voice to protect his identity. He's one of the millions of Hong Kongers taking to the streets.
Many people here are wearing face masks. People are hiding their identities. They fear that the government will press charges.
What started as a protest against an extradition bill has become the most serious challenge to the Communist Party's authority since the Tiananmen Square protest 3 decades ago. As the demonstrations enter a third month, neither the government nor the protesters is willing to back down.
Police fired tear gas, rubber bullet, and used the police baton to hit the protester.
But it's not enough to deter the demonstrators. So what happens now?
This is a real nightmare for the communist government in Beijing. They can either crush Hong Kong, or they can tolerate being defied in a way that undermines everything about their whole structure of government. They have no good choices.
Hong Kong is one of the most important financial centres in the world, and it has a unique status. It's a city in China, but it's not entirely Chinese. It has its own currency, its own passport, its own legal system. There's even a boundary between Hong Kong and the rest of China, and you need a permit to cross it. This is all down to its history. In 1842, Hong Kong was ceded by the Chinese to the British after the First Opium War. But in 1997, Britain gave it back to China.
Hong Kong people are to run Hong Kong.
With one important condition. For 50 years, Hong Kong was to be governed under what is known as one country, two systems. The chief executive, who runs Hong Kong, would be appointed by a pro-Chinese committee. But the city was guaranteed a high degree of autonomy, with its own government, legal system, and economic independence until 2047. Over the past decade, those rights have been eroded. Fuller democracy, promised as part of the handover agreement, has yet to be granted by China.
Yellow ribbon means come back democracy.
Emily Lau was a Hong Kong politician for 25 years. Today she still campaigns for democracy.
Things have deteriorated fast, particularly since President Xi Jinping came to power. So people are very concerned. We want freedoms, we want personal safety, we want the rule of law.
China's grip has got ever tighter. In 2012, the government tried to install a patriotic pro-Chinese education system. Then, 5 Hong Kong booksellers who sold material banned in mainland China disappeared. In 2016, pro-democracy opposition leaders were thrown out of Hong Kong's parliament for insulting China when swearing their oaths. And then in February this year, the government introduced a bill which would have allowed extradition to the mainland.
Very few people in Hong Kong imagine there's going to be full-on Western-style democracy, but they are very angry about the way that what they believe they were promised was something much more accountable, where you would have something close to universal suffrage. The basic social contract between the people of Hong Kong and their government is breaking down.
All this is fueling the protesters' anger.
The invisible hand from China are getting more visible. They are putting more controls on Hong Kong's autonomy, democracy. Hong Kong is not China.
All those folks in Hong Kong, they didn't grow up under the Chinese umbrella, the Communist Revolution. They have more in common with Britain than they do with mainland China. And the various generations are used to liberty. And Hong Kong was everyone would point to it as the great capitalist center of the world. Here you have a little island, essentially. And yet freedom of speech, democracy, freedom of commerce. It was the most libertarian, really, country out there. and it would be pointed to often. I mean, Milton Friedman was in his famous PBS series, went to Hong Kong and spoke about all the wonders of Hong Kong. Well, China's trying to crush Hong Kong. They've infiltrated their police force. They've infiltrated their government. And now the question is, how much repression and oppression are they going to unleash on these people? And these people really are protesting for their lives, for their liberties. That's exactly what's taking place. China is completely out of control. China is a very, very dangerous country. The government is very dangerous. Your allegiance is to the Communist Party. And this is a Communist Party that will do anything to keep power. This is a Communist Party that's killed 60 million of its own people since the 1940s. So it's a huge problem. It's a huge problem for the United States because they steal our technology. They are very, very diabolical in the way they conduct themselves in terms of trade deals, in terms of loans to third world governments that need money desperately and then they can't pay back, and then China takes over their naval bases, for instance, in Africa. China is constantly scheming. Both ends of the Panama Canal are managed, quote unquote, by a Chinese corporation, which is a disaster, and I could go on and on and on. And what about America's corporations? And what about America's sports leagues and so forth? They've all buckled. This is from the Daily Caller. America's elite institutions are catering to Communist China. The NBA provided the latest example Sunday night when League Commissioner Adam Silver apologized for the Houston Rockets general manager Daryl Morey's tweet in support of pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong. Rocket star James Harden followed suit and apologized to China for Morey's tweets. So now China's reaching into our own country, into our own society, and it's able to elicit, really not even elicit, get apologies even before they raise concerns. Because so many of these corporations and these leagues now have business activity going on in China, and that's the most important. It's really quite remarkable, isn't it? You hear these NBA players go on and on about Donald Trump. So many of these owners and so forth are quite liberal. We're not going to visit the White House. And when it comes to a regime like this, they buckle like that. The Brooklyn Nets' new billionaire owner, Joseph Tsai, slammed Morey on Sunday night. Tsai, the co-founder of Chinese internet titan Alibaba. Now, so he's part, obviously, he's bought and paid for by the Chinese. Described Morey's tweet as so damaging to the relationship with our fans in China, adding that the hurt that this incident has caused will take a long time to repair. A tweet. China Daily, the communist government's propaganda arm, used the NBA's conciliatory reaction to warn other companies to learn a lesson. The big Chinese market is open to the world, but those who challenge China's core interests and hurt Chinese people, their feelings, cannot make any profit from it, they said. And the NBA isn't alone in bowing to Communist China, they write at the Daily Caller. American universities have allowed the Chinese government to fund these centers called Confucius Institutes, we've talked about that provide the communist regime with avenues to infuse pro-China propaganda in American academia. 89 Confucius Institutes were operating in the U.S. as of September 2019. Hollywood is self-censored from years in order to ensure access to the Chinese market. The U.S. government published a report in 2015 detailing how filmmakers tailor their messaging to appease Chinese audiences and, more importantly, Chinese government censors. U.S. filmmakers self-censor scenes, dialogue, images, and themes they fear will jeopardize their film's chance of receiving Chinese approval for import, stated the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission's report titled, Directed by Hollywood, Edited by China. For a type of movie, particularly the global blockbusters, they're not going to go and make something that the Chinese would reject for social or political reasons. Peter Shayo, the CEO of independent Hollywood Chinese co-production studio, told the commission. MGM Studios digitally altered the 2012 remake of Red Dawn, that was a good movie, to change the invading army's nationality from Chinese, as was the case during the film, to North Korean. The Walt Disney Company threatened to boycott Georgia in May if a pro-life law took effect, even though the company apparently has no issue doing business with the Chinese regime, which is a notorious human rights violator. Athletic apparel giant Nike pulled a shoe line from Chinese markets in June after the shoe's designer tweeted support for the Hong Kong protesters. Nike's appeasement of China fits into a larger and more dangerous pattern of kowtowing by Western companies to Beijing's demands for censorship, the Washington Post editorial board warned at the time. Good for them. The NFL is apparently looking to emulate the NBA in accessing Chinese revenue streams. NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell described China in January as a priority market. China is a priority market for the NFL, he said. We believe that our game has a great deal of potential to expand, to grow, and bring new fans into our game. No concern about the genocide and the rest that's taking place in China. This is horrendous. We have had double-digit growth this past year in China in our fan base and people engaging with our game, he added, so we are excited by it. So I want you to think about this. The sellout by the corporations, by the various sports leagues, previously by our own government. And China's on the march. It's crushing its own people. It's trying to take control of all the waters and airspace in its region. It's now reaching out into Africa, into the Middle East, into our hemisphere, Central and South America, as well as parts of Europe. It's working very closely with Putin on technology, among other things. It's a grave, grave challenge, and you're not going to hear enough about this from our newsrooms, and the nightly news, on the cable shows, or any of the rest of it. Little hits here and there, but I wish they would cover the threat of China the way they would cover their effort to destroy Donald Trump. Then the country could unite around a just cause, a righteous cause, self-defense, and our own survival. That's it.